John Miller loved his mornings more than anything else. The sun would rise slowly over the quiet neighborhood, casting a golden glow across the houses, and the lake behind his home would sparkle like glass. That lake wasn't just a piece of water to him. It was a family treasure, a place filled with memories of his childhood, his father, and even his grandfather. Long before houses surrounded the area, John's grandfather had purchased the land. He built a small dock with his own hands, strong wooden planks that still stood firm after decades. John remembered sitting there as a boy, holding a tiny fishing rod while his grandfather taught him patience. "Fishing is not about catching," his grandfather would say with a gentle smile. "It's about peace. If you wait long enough, the lake will always give you something." Those words never left John. Even after growing older, building his career, and eventually buying the family house, he kept that tradition alive. Every Saturday morning, he carried his fishing pole, a small tackle box, and a folding chair down to the dock. He would sit for hours, listening to birdsong, watching ripples spread across the water, and feeling the calmness that life outside the lake could never provide. But while John treasured his private lake, not everyone in the neighborhood saw it the same way. The community had a homeowners association, and at the head of it was Karen Thompson. Everyone knew her. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed if your grass grew an inch too long, or if your trash can stayed out on the curb a few minutes late. She believed in rules, strict rules, and she believed everyone should follow them whether they liked it or not. At first, John never had much trouble with her. He paid his dues on time, kept his yard clean, and rarely attended HOA meetings. He wasn't interested in arguments or neighborhood drama. His focus was his family, his job, and the lake that gave him peace. But lately, he had noticed something strange. Whenever he walked toward the dock, Karen's eyes followed him. Her house sat at the edge of the street, and from her front window, she could see the path that led down to the water. John began to notice her curtains shift whenever he carried his fishing rod. Sometimes she even stepped outside, folding her arms and watching him, her lips pressed tightly together. At first, he tried to ignore it. People stared, people judged, that was just life. But the way she looked at him wasn't just curiosity. It was disapproval. She seemed bothered by the fact that he fished on his own property. One afternoon, as John reeled in a small bass, he heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind him. Turning around, he saw Karen herself, dressed neatly as always, her arms crossed tightly. "John," she said sharply, "we need to talk." He set his fishing pole aside, sensing trouble. "What about?" "That lake," she replied, pointing toward the water. "It's not yours to fish in. It belongs to the association. You shouldn't be out here." John's brows furrowed. "That's not true, Karen. The lake is on my property. It was here before this neighborhood was even built. My family has owned it for decades." Karen shook her head, her voice firm. "I checked the community guidelines. The board has decided it's part of the shared land. If you keep fishing here, you'll be breaking the rules." John felt a wave of frustration. He knew the maps, he knew the deeds, and he knew the truth. The lake was his, and no rule from the HOA could change that. Still, he tried to stay calm. "With respect, Karen," he said evenly, "the survey records say otherwise. The property line includes this entire lake. It's mine." Her expression hardened. "Rules are rules, John. If you keep ignoring them, there will be consequences." For a moment, silence hung in the air. The water rippled gently, a bird called from a tree, and John realized this was just the beginning of something bigger. Karen wasn't going to let this go. He turned back to his chair, picked up his fishing rod, and cast the line back into the water. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said quietly, without looking at her. "And I won't stop." Karen stood there for another moment, clearly upset that he hadn't obeyed. Finally, she spun on her heel and walked away, her footsteps sharp and angry. John sighed, watching the line float across the lake. He wanted peace, not conflict. But deep down, he knew Karen's warning wasn't empty. She was the kind of person who always got her way or tried to. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John packed up his gear and walked back home. The lake still shone beautifully in the fading light, but his heart was heavy. Something told him that his quiet weekends of fishing might soon be interrupted by a storm he never asked for. And as he closed his back door, he thought to himself, how far is Karen willing to go to take what isn't hers? The next morning, John tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting back to the lake and the conversation with Karen. Her words echoed in his head, "If you keep ignoring the rules, there will be consequences." He had heard plenty of stories about her before. Neighbors often whispered about how she fined people for leaving Christmas lights up too long, or how she once demanded that someone repaint their front door because the color wasn't community approved. But this time, it wasn't about grass or doors or decorations. This was about the lake. His lake. And that made it personal. Still, John didn't want to believe she could cause real trouble. After all, the lake was on his property. He had the deed in his filing cabinet. No matter what the HOA claimed, the law was clear. But knowing Karen, she wouldn't give up easily. Later that week, as John watered the flowers in his yard, he noticed Karen approaching again. She carried a clipboard in one hand and walked with quick, purposeful steps. Her expression was stern, the kind of look a teacher might give a student who hadn't done his homework. "John," she said firmly, stopping at the edge of his driveway, "we need to clear this matter up." John turned off the hose and faced her. "Karen, we already talked. The lake is mine. There's nothing to clear up." Karen tapped her clipboard. "I have documentation here. The HOA board met last night. It was decided that the lake is part of our shared community property. Fishing there without permission is a violation." John frowned. "Karen, the board can't just vote away private land. That's not how property works." Her eyes narrowed. "The board sets the rules for the community, and you are part of this community. If you don't respect those rules, then fines will follow. And if fines don't work, stronger actions will be taken." John kept his voice calm. "Stronger actions? What does that mean?" Karen gave a small, tight smile. "Let's just say it would be unwise to test me." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air was still, the sound of children playing down the street carried faintly on the breeze. Finally, John said quietly, "Karen, I'm not breaking the law. I'm fishing on my own property. If you fine me, I won't pay. If you try to take this further, I'll fight back. I'm not afraid to stand up for what's mine." Karen's smile faded. She adjusted the papers on her clipboard, then turned sharply and walked away without another word. John watched her leave, his chest tight with unease. She wasn't bluffing. He could tell. Karen was already planning her next move. That night, John sat at his kitchen table and pulled out his property deed. The official document clearly showed the boundaries of his land, and the lake sat entirely within them. He ran his finger along the printed map, tracing the outline of the water. There was no doubt he was in the right. But being right didn't mean he would have an easy time. Karen had power in the neighborhood. Most of the board members listened to her, and many of the residents were too afraid to challenge her. She had built her reputation on control, and if he resisted her, she might see it as a direct threat to her authority. The following weekend, John tried to ignore his worries. He set out for the dock with his fishing rod, determined not to let Karen's threat steal his peace. The morning air was cool, the water shimmered softly under the sun, and for a while, he felt at ease. He cast his line and waited, just like he always had. But even as he fished, his mind stayed restless. Every sound behind him made him turn his head, half expecting Karen to appear again. He thought about his neighbors and wondered what they would think if they knew what was happening. Would they support him? Or would they side with her out of fear? After a couple of hours, he packed up his things and walked home, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. As he placed his gear in the garage, he glanced toward Karen's house. Sure enough, her curtains shifted slightly, and he caught the faint outline of her standing there. Watching. Always watching. That evening, John called his old friend David, who lived in another town but had once served on a local HOA board. He explained the situation carefully. "Karen can't do that," David said immediately. "And HOA can only control what's actually community property. If the lake is on your deed, it's yours. She can't touch it." "That's what I thought," John said with a sigh. "But she doesn't seem to care about what's legal. She just wants control." "Then you need to be ready," David advised. "Document everything. Keep records of her threats. If she tries anything, you'll need proof." John nodded slowly. His friend was right. Karen wasn't just going to stop because he told her no. She was the type to push harder, to test boundaries until she got what she wanted. As he hung up the phone, John felt a mix of determination and unease. He didn't want conflict, but he also wouldn't let anyone take away his lake. Not now, not ever. The lake had always been his safe place, a place of family memories and peace. But now, it was becoming something else, a battleground. And deep down, John knew Karen was preparing her next move. The next Saturday morning started just like the others. John woke early, brewed a cup of coffee, and carried his fishing gear down the familiar path to the lake. The sun had just risen, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and orange. The water looked peaceful, reflecting the trees and the dock that had stood there for so many years. John set up his chair, tossed his line into the water, and let out a long, relaxed breath. He wanted this moment to remind him that peace still existed, even if Karen's warnings had unsettled him all week. But his calm didn't last long. After about 20 minutes, John heard heavy footsteps behind him. They weren't the light steps of a neighbor out for a walk. These sounded heavier, more purposeful. He turned his head slowly, and what he saw made his chest tighten. 2 men were approaching the dock. Neither of them looked familiar. They weren't neighbors. One was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket despite the warm weather. The other was shorter but stockier, with a shaved head and a serious expression. The taller man spoke first. His voice was low and firm. "You can't fish here." John stood up, gripping his fishing pole tightly. "Who are you?" The shorter man stepped forward. "We don't need to tell you who we are. Karen sent us. She says this lake belongs to the community. You need to stop fishing here." Hearing Karen's name didn't surprise John, but it still made his stomach sink. She hadn't just complained to the board or threatened fines, she had actually sent people to confront him. "This is my lake," John said firmly. "It's private property. You don't belong here." The tall man smirked. "Doesn't matter what you think. HOA rules say no fishing. So pack up your stuff." John's heartbeat quickened, but he tried to stay calm. "The HOA can't make rules about land they don't own. I have the deed to this property. You're trespassing." The shorter man took another step forward, his tone harder now. "We're not asking, buddy. We're telling. Pack it up, or things will get unpleasant." For a split second, John thought about his grandfather's words about patience, about peace. But this wasn't like waiting for a fish to bite. This was someone trying to scare him away from what was his. Slowly, John reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a quiet press, he started recording. He held the phone casually at his side, making sure the camera caught both men clearly. "I want you to repeat that," John said steadily. "Say it again. Karen sent you." The tall man frowned. "You heard us." The shorter man added, "She doesn't want you out here. So don't come back." John let the words sink into the recording. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice stayed calm. "This is my land. If you come back here again, I'll report you for trespassing." The taller man laughed, a short, mocking sound. "Report us? To who? Karen runs this neighborhood. You're outnumbered." But instead of answering, John just kept the phone steady. He didn't argue further. He knew every second of this video could be proof later. After a tense silence, the two men exchanged glances. The shorter one muttered something under his breath, then tugged at the taller man's arm. "Let's go. This isn't worth it." The tall man hesitated, glaring at John for a moment before turning away. Together, they walked back up the path, their footsteps fading into the distance. John stood there for a while, his heart still pounding. The lake was calm again, but the peace he loved felt broken. He sat down slowly, staring at the water but not really seeing it. For the rest of the morning, his line sat untouched in the water. He wasn't thinking about fishing anymore. He was thinking about what had just happened and what it meant. When he finally packed up and walked back to his house, he replayed the video on his phone. The recording was clear. Both men had admitted that Karen sent them. Both had tried to force him off his own land. At home, John sat at his kitchen table, phone in hand, and considered his next step. Calling the police crossed his mind, but he wasn't sure they would take it seriously. It wasn't a violent confrontation, and sometimes officers saw HOA disputes as civil issues. Still, he couldn't just ignore this. Karen had crossed a line. As he sat there, he realized something important. If Karen was bold enough to send people once, she might do it again. And next time, they might not leave so easily. John closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with determination. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. It was about standing up to someone who thought they could control everything. He wasn't going to let her win. For now, he saved the video carefully, creating backups on his computer. It was proof. Proof that Karen had gone too far. The lake still belonged to him, and he was ready to fight for it no matter how hard Karen pushed. John spent the rest of that Saturday evening pacing around his living room. The confrontation at the lake replayed in his mind like a broken record. Every word, every step, every look from those two men stayed sharp in his memory. Their threat wasn't loud, but it was clear enough. Karen wanted him gone from the lake, and she wasn't afraid to send others to enforce her will. He sat at his table and played the video once more. The voices were sharp and undeniable. Karen sent us. She doesn't want you out here. That was more than just neighborhood gossip. That was proof. Still, John knew video alone wasn't enough. He had to think carefully about his next step. Going to the police was an option, but he had doubts. What if they treated it as a small neighborhood issue? What if they told him it was just an HOA matter and refused to get involved? He needed an authority that would take property rights seriously. As he mulled over his choices, he thought about his father. His father had always taught him to stand firm but also to be smart. Don't let anger make your choices, his father used to say. Make decisions that solve the problem, not ones that create more of it. With that advice echoing in his heart, John pulled out the folder where he kept important documents. He carefully laid out the property deed, the survey map, and the papers that proved the lake was part of his land. He compared the boundaries on the map with the way the water curved behind his house. There was no mistake. Every inch of the lake sat inside his property line. John felt a small wave of relief. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't imagining things. The land was his, and he had the papers to prove it. But the relief didn't last long. Another thought quickly followed. If Karen was willing to send people once, what's stopping her from doing it again? The next time, they might not just walk away. That night, John hardly slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the men's faces, heard their footsteps, and felt the tension all over again. By morning, he knew he had to act. Sitting quietly and hoping the problem would disappear wasn't an option anymore. Over breakfast, John made a list of possible actions. Call the police. They could write a report, but they might brush it off as a civil disagreement. Go to the HOA board. But with Karen in control, that would likely go nowhere. Seek outside help. Maybe a state agency or legal authority could step in. The third option caught his attention. He remembered reading once that wildlife enforcement often handled disputes related to fishing rights, hunting, and access to water on private land. They dealt with laws that were clear, not just rules made by an HOA. If anyone could confirm his rights, it would be them. Feeling a surge of determination, John pulled out his laptop and searched for the local wildlife enforcement office. He found their contact number and saved it. He also scanned his property deed and the video of the confrontation, organizing everything into a neat folder. Later that afternoon, he decided to test his idea. He called the office and explained the situation calmly, leaving out no detail. The officer on the other end listened carefully. His name was Robert Harris, and his voice was steady and professional. "Mr. Miller," Robert said, "from what you've told me, it sounds like this isn't just a neighborhood disagreement. If that lake is part of your property, then no one has the right to stop you from fishing there. And if they're entering your land to harass you, that could be a violation." John felt a small weight lift off his shoulders. "So, you can help?" he asked. Robert replied, "We'll need to review the documents and the video, but yes, we take these cases seriously. If you send us everything, we'll investigate." For the first time in days, John allowed himself to smile. He thanked Robert, promised to email the documents immediately, and hung up. After sending the files, John sat back and let out a long breath. He wasn't powerless anymore. He had taken the first real step to protect his rights. That evening, he walked down to the dock again. The air was cool, the sky painted with streaks of gold and purple as the sun lowered. He cast his line into the water, trying to let the peace of the lake wash away the stress of the last few days. Still, he couldn't help but look over his shoulder from time to time. The memory of those men lingered, and he knew Karen wasn't finished. She was the kind of person who always pushed harder when challenged. But John was ready now. He wasn't just a man with a fishing pole anymore, he was a man with proof, support, and determination. As he reeled in his line, he whispered quietly to himself, "This is my lake. And I'm not giving it up." He knew the days ahead wouldn't be simple, but for the first time in a while, he felt prepared. A battle was coming, but he wouldn't be facing it alone. The following Monday morning, John sat at his desk with his coffee, staring at his computer screen. He had sent the documents and video to the Wildlife Enforcement Office the night before, and now he waited for a reply. Every sound, the ding of an email notification, the ring of his phone made his heart race. He was ready for answers, ready for someone official to say, "Yes, you are right. The lake is yours." By late afternoon, his phone finally buzzed. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but his gut told him it was important. He picked up quickly. "Mr. Miller?" a calm voice asked. "Yes, this is John," he replied. "This is Robert Harris with the Wildlife Enforcement Office. I've reviewed your documents and the video you sent. I want you to know we take this seriously." John sat up straighter in his chair. "Thank you. I didn't know who else to call. The HOA isn't listening, and Karen," his voice trailed off. "I understand," Robert said firmly. "The deed is clear. The lake falls entirely within your property lines. That means it's yours, and you have the right to fish there. No HOA rule can override that. And from the video, it looks like individuals entered your property and tried to interfere with your legal activity. That's not acceptable." John felt a wave of relief. "So what happens next?" "We'll need to follow procedure," Robert explained. "First, we'll document everything officially. Then, we'll pay a visit to your property this weekend. We'll also keep an eye out in case those men return. If they do, we'll be there." John nodded, even though Robert couldn't see him. "That would mean a lot. Thank you for helping." "That's our job," Robert replied. "Stay calm, Mr. Miller. You're not alone in this." When the call ended, John leaned back in his chair, a mixture of emotions washing over him. He felt lighter, knowing someone was finally listening, but he also knew Karen wouldn't be happy when she realized he had called in the authorities. The week dragged by slowly. Each evening, John walked to the dock, fished for a while, and watched the lake. The water shimmered in the fading light, but his mind was restless. Every time he heard footsteps or voices nearby, his chest tightened. He couldn't shake the thought that Karen might send someone again. On Friday evening, John spotted Karen herself walking past his backyard fence. She stopped, glanced toward the lake, and then looked at him. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave a thin smile, the kind of smile that wasn't friendly at all. Without a word, she turned and walked away. John stood on the dock long after she disappeared, the weight of her silent challenge pressing on him. She knew he wasn't giving in, and she wasn't backing down either. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. John packed his tackle box and walked to the dock, his heart steady but alert. He set up his chair and cast his line, determined to enjoy his morning. For a while, it felt almost normal. The soft splash of water, the distant chirping of birds, the smell of fresh air. It reminded him of why he loved this place so much. Then, just as he expected, the peace broke. The same two men from before appeared on the path. Their steps were firm, their faces set with the same serious expressions. John's stomach tightened, but he stayed seated, gripping his fishing pole. The taller man called out, "Didn't we tell you? No fishing here." John stood slowly, his phone already in his pocket, ready to record if needed. "I told you before," he said firmly, "this is my property. You don't belong here." The shorter man shook his head. "Karen said you'd be stubborn. But you're making this worse for yourself." Before John could reply, another voice cut through the air. "State Wildlife Enforcement. Step away from him." John turned his head in surprise. From the trees nearby, two uniformed officers emerged. One of them was Robert Harris. Their presence was calm but commanding, their badges glinting in the sunlight. The two men froze, clearly caught off guard. Robert spoke firmly, "This property is private. Mr. Miller has the legal right to fish here. You two are trespassing and interfering with lawful activity." The taller man stammered, We were just save it," Robert interrupted. "We have enough evidence. You're coming with us." The officers moved forward quickly, securing the situation with quiet authority. John stood still, his heart racing, hardly believing what he was seeing. For days he had felt cornered, but now the tables had turned. The men didn't resist. They knew they were outmatched. Within minutes, the officers were leading them off the property. Robert turned to John. "You did the right thing by calling us. We'll be filing a full report. And Karen Thompson will be investigated as well." John nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," he said quietly. As the officers walked away with the two men, John sat back down on his chair, his fishing pole still in hand. The lake shimmered in front of him, calm and beautiful once more. For the first time in weeks, he felt truly safe. The battle wasn't over yet. He knew Karen would face her own reckoning soon, but for now, he had won an important step. And as he cast his line into the water again, he whispered to himself, "This is my lake. No one will take it from me." The morning after the arrest, John woke up earlier than usual. For the first time in many weeks, his sleep had been peaceful. He walked out onto his porch with a cup of coffee in hand and looked at the lake. The water reflected the golden light of sunrise, calm and undisturbed. For John, it was more than just a lake now. It was a symbol of his right to live peacefully, without anyone trying to control him. But he also knew that the real challenge was still ahead. The two men had been taken away, yet Karen was the root of the problem. She had sent them, and she would likely deny everything. John suspected she would try to twist the story, painting herself as the victim. Later that afternoon, Robert Harris from Wildlife Enforcement stopped by. He parked his truck near John's driveway and walked up with a folder in hand. "Good afternoon, Mr. Miller," Robert greeted warmly. "Robert, thank you again for yesterday," John said sincerely. "I can't tell you how much it meant to finally feel protected." Robert nodded. "You did the right thing. But we're not finished." The two men admitted they were acting under Karen Thompson's direction. "We'll be visiting the HOA office today." John's eyes widened slightly. "Do you need me to come?" Robert smiled. "It might help if you do. It's your property, and your testimony matters." John hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right. I'll come." The HOA office was located in a small brick building near the entrance of the neighborhood. Usually, John avoided that place. He didn't like the way the board operated, always trying to control little details of people's lives: what color their mailbox could be, how short their grass had to be, even how many guests could park in their driveway. When he and Robert arrived, the secretary at the front desk gave them a nervous look. "Miss Thompson is in the meeting room," she said softly, as if she already knew trouble was coming. Robert opened the door without hesitation, and John followed him in. Karen sat at the long wooden table, her arms crossed tightly. Two other board members sat beside her, both looking uncomfortable. "Well, this is surprising," Karen said with a cold smile. "Mr. Miller and enforcement officers, is it? What brings you here?" Robert placed the folder on the table and spoke calmly. "We are here to discuss the matter of Mr. Miller's lake. We have evidence that you instructed two men to trespass on his property and interfere with his lawful right to fish. Those men confirmed your involvement." Karen's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "That's ridiculous. I never sent anyone. They must have misunderstood." John finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. "Karen, I saw them. They said your name. They came twice. You can't deny it." The other board members exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a man named Thomas, cleared his throat. "Karen, if this is true, it could put the HOA in legal trouble. We can't ignore this." Karen's eyes flashed with frustration. "The HOA has rules, and I was only trying to protect them. If everyone fishes in that lake, it will be ruined." Robert leaned forward. "The rules of an HOA cannot override property law. The deed proves the lake belongs entirely to Mr. Miller. You have no authority there. By sending men onto his land, you broke the law. That's trespassing and harassment." Karen's face grew red. "This is absurd. He moved in and thinks he can do whatever he wants. This neighborhood has standards." John shook his head. "No, Karen. I followed the law. I respected my land. You tried to control me when you had no right. You turned neighbors into enemies instead of friends." The silence that followed was heavy. The two board members avoided Karen's glare, clearly unwilling to defend her. Robert finally stood. "Karen Thompson, you will be facing charges. The court will decide the outcome. But from this moment on, you are not to interfere with Mr. Miller or his property. Do you understand?" Karen's hands clenched into fists, but she said nothing. Back at home, John felt both exhausted and relieved. The confrontation had been difficult, but necessary. He knew Karen wouldn't admit her fault easily, but the truth was out. The board had seen it, Robert had handled it professionally, and now the law would take its course. That evening, John returned to his dock once again. He sat with his fishing rod, letting the peaceful rhythm of the water calm him. For the first time, he didn't look over his shoulder in fear. He didn't wait for footsteps or harsh voices. The only sounds were the crickets, the gentle splash of water, and the breeze moving through the trees. As he reeled in his line, John thought about the journey of the past weeks. He had moved here for peace, but instead he had been tested. He had learned that sometimes peace required courage, standing up to people who tried to push you down. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "The lake is free. And so am I." The battle with Karen wasn't over. There would be hearings, paperwork, maybe more arguments, but John was ready. He wasn't just defending his right to fish. he was defending his right to live without fear. And deep inside, he knew that no matter what came next, he had already won the most important fight. The weeks following the confrontation with Karen Thompson were tense, but John Miller felt a growing sense of hope. Wildlife enforcement had filed their reports, and the legal process had begun. Every day, he checked his email and mailbox, awaiting updates, but he refused to let anxiety ruin his mornings at the lake. Fishing had always been his sanctuary, and he wasn't about to give that up. The hearing day finally arrived. John dressed neatly in a light blue shirt and khaki pants, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination. He arrived at the local courthouse early, holding his folder tightly. Inside were the deeds, survey maps, the video recordings, and notes he had taken throughout the entire ordeal. Each piece of evidence was a testament to his right and the truth. Karen Thompson arrived shortly after him, her usual confident demeanor slightly shaken. She wore a crisp white blouse and a dark skirt, her posture rigid. Though she tried to appear composed, there was tension in her movements. She had insisted she was in the right, but the documentation presented by wildlife enforcement told a different story. Inside the courtroom, Judge Allen reviewed the case carefully. John felt his heart beat faster as he listened to the proceedings. Robert Harris, the wildlife enforcement officer, spoke clearly, presenting the evidence. Your Honor, Mr. Miller has been the rightful owner of the lake for decades. The HOA president, Karen Thompson, instructed individuals to trespass on his property and interfere with lawful fishing. We have video and testimony to confirm this. The defense, representing Karen, tried to argue that she was only acting in the interest of the community. Your Honor, Ms. Thompson was following HOA guidelines. She had no intention of breaking the law, the lawyer stated. John felt a pang of frustration but stayed calm. He knew the evidence was stronger than any claim she could make. Judge Allen looked at Karen seriously. The evidence is clear. The lake is private property belonging to Mr. Miller. Sending individuals to interfere with lawful activity constitutes trespassing and harassment. HOA guidelines do not override private property law. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent. She had no reply. Turning to John, Judge Allen said, Mr. Miller, you have the right to access your property and fish on your lake without interference. The court orders that Ms. Thompson and any individuals acting on her behalf are prohibited from entering your land or attempting to interfere with your rights in the future. John felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He nodded, thankful that the judge had recognized the truth. After the hearing, John walked outside into the bright sunlight. He felt a warmth not just from the sun, but from the knowledge that justice had been served. People passing by nodded politely, some offering small smiles of support. For weeks, he had felt tension in his neighborhood, but now it seemed to shift toward calm. Returning home, John decided to take a walk to the lake. The water shimmered in the late afternoon sun, peaceful and clear. He carried his fishing rod but didn't rush to set it up. Instead, he took a deep breath and let the sounds of nature fill him: birds calling, leaves rustling, and the gentle lap of water against the dock. Sitting down in his usual chair, he cast his line into the water. The tension of the past week slowly faded with every ripple that spread across the lake. Fishing had never felt so rewarding, not just because of the fish he might catch, but because of the peace he had fought for and won. John thought about the journey that had brought him here. The threats, the confrontations, the fear. Those moments had tested his patience and courage. But he had faced them calmly, strategically, and with proof on his side. Wildlife enforcement had supported him, and the court had validated his rights. Most importantly, he had never let anger control his decisions. He had acted wisely, and now he could enjoy the freedom of his lake. Days turned into weeks, and the neighborhood slowly adjusted. Karen Thompson was removed from her HOA position after residents learned the truth. The board issued a formal apology to John, acknowledging his legal rights and confirming that the lake belonged entirely to him. The other residents, many of whom had quietly admired his perseverance, treated him with respect. The atmosphere around the lake returned to something gentle and friendly, and for the first time in months, John felt the sense of calm he had always associated with this place. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John sat on the dock with a small smile. The water mirrored the pink and orange sky, the breeze was soft, and everything seemed perfectly still. He thought about his grandfather, the memories of his childhood, and how important it was to protect what was rightfully yours. He whispered to himself, "This is my lake. And it will always be my sanctuary." Casting his line one last time that evening, John felt a renewed connection to the lake. It wasn't just a place to fish, it was a place of triumph, of peace, and of courage. Every ripple on the water reminded him that he had stood firm, faced challenges, and emerged victorious. And as twilight settled over the neighborhood, John Miller finally felt completely free. The lake belonged to him, the peace he had fought for was restored, and the future looked bright. The battle had ended, but the lesson remained: standing up for what is right is always worth the effort.